let's start with the fact that 35 years ago, a guy who was unable to maintain an erection was known as being impotent. Think about it. A guy who's impotent is weak, he's ineffectual, he's certainly not sexy. Nobody wants to be the impotent guy. And then that all changed in 1998 when the impotent guy morphed into the guy with erectile dysfunction. Now, the guy with erectile dysfunction, I mean, he was strong, he was sexy, he was powerful. And he was so powerful that he could even run for president. And even when he lost, Bob Dole had no problem going on national TV to talk about his newly functional penis. Now, do you remember this? I mean, this is crazy. But this is the thing, that what was important about the launch of Viagra was that this not only gave men the language to talk about their penis and how it wasn't functioning for them, but it gave them motivation. It gave them motivation to go to their doctor's office, and the doctors were happy to talk about it for the first time because there was something they could offer them. They could write a prescription. So here's the problem. By age 60, for every guy that has problems with his uncooperative penis, there's a woman who is not able to have an orgasm. So the obvious question is, where's our Viagra? Where's our Viagra? And well, our Viagra simply doesn't exist. But even worse is that this conversation isn't happening. It's not happening. Doctors aren't talking about it. If they do, it's like, oh, just have a glass of wine. So, all right, show of hands, how many people here, the last time you went to see your doctor, any kind of doctor, for your general physical, did your doctor say to you, are you able to have an orgasm? Exactly. So today we're going to have that conversation. And what I'm going to do is talk about the science of orgasm, why sometimes women are not able to have an orgasm. And I'm very solution-driven, so we're going to talk solutions, and then talk a little bit about if cannabis is going to make you come. So, what does it take to even have an orgasm? Well, it's actually pretty simple. You only need a couple of things. One is you need arousal. Arousal is the physical manifestation of being excited. So that means that there's increased blood flow to the pelvis, to the vagina, to the clitoris. That's going to result in a little muscle tension and lubrication and all those good things. And then you also need some clitoral nerve stimulation. Now, there are times when you don't need that, but most women require clitoral nerve stimulation. So what do you need? You need adequate blood flow, so that means an intact vascular system, and you need nerve endings that are going to respond, and that are going to respond and send a message to the spinal cord, which is going to help those pelvic muscles contract when you have an orgasm, and that's going to send messages to the brain so that the pleasure centers in the brain get activated. Now, what's not required, interestingly, is estrogen. Now, obviously, women have no estrogen after menopause, and there are many, many women that are able to have an orgasm just fine. Now, don't get me wrong. Estrogen is really helpful, and I think every single woman should take estrogen post-menopause for all the reasons that have been talked about all morning. But to have an orgasm, you do not need to have estrogen. What else isn't required? Well, you don't need to have intercourse. Now, of course, a lot of women don't know this, and when I was running the Center for Sexual Medicine and Menopause at Northwestern, I cannot tell you how many women would come to the clinic saying, I'm not able to have an orgasm during intercourse, help me. There's something wrong with me. And we actually have a medical term for women who are not able to have an orgasm during intercourse. And yeah, we do. Medical term is normal. It is absolutely normal for a woman to not be able to have an orgasm during intercourse. We don't expect her to. Why? Well, the reason why is because the clitoris is in a really bad position for stimulation during straight up penis and vagina intercourse. It's just not going to happen. We know it's not going to happen for the majority of women. And we now actually have scientific studies that prove why. It turns out that your individual, your personal anatomy, is going to be predictive of if the guy's pubic bone is going to be hitting your clitoris and enable you to have an orgasm. So specifically, if you measure, and I know you're all going to go home and get your tape measures out, okay, if you measure the distance between your clitoris, and we use the urethra because it's a little bit easier than the opening of the vagina, and if it's less than 1 inch, then you are in that small club that you are likely to have an orgasm during intercourse. Now, you're wondering, who did this groundbreaking research? I mean, this is so cool. How did we even know this? Well, let me tell you a little bit about Marie Bonaparte. Marie Bonaparte was the great-great-grandniece of Napoleon. Did any of you see that movie? Way too many battles for me, I didn't like it. But anyway, so Marie Bonaparte was working with Freud. She was a clinical sexologist, and she was like really frustrated about the idea that she wasn't able to have an orgasm during intercourse. So she got out her tape measure and said, wow, my clitoris is pretty far away from the opening of the vagina. And then, I don't know how she did this, she gathered over 200 of her friends and measured their distance. And with this research, which is still in, I'm a research fellow at the Kinsey Institute, and all this research is there in French, in her handwriting, and she found that if the clitoris was more than 1 inch away, that it just wasn't gonna happen. But the story gets more interesting. She was a problem solver, so she decided to surgically move her own clitoris. I'm not making this up. She finds a surgeon who moves her clitoris a little closer to her vaginal opening. It didn't work, so she did it again, and it still didn't work. The point being that this is not a problem with orgasm. This is a problem with Maria Bonaparte. But what I really want to focus on today is women who, in spite of knowing where their clitoris is and what to do with it, are not able to have an orgasm. So medically, we divide this into 2 groups: primary orgasmic dysfunction and acquired orgasmic dysfunction. Now, primary orgasmic dysfunction is women who've never, ever, ever, ever had an orgasm. And while there is sometimes a biologic reason for this, or because of medication or something else, in most cases, this is because of a psychosocial reason, maybe cultural, maybe religious, maybe a history of trauma. In most cases, they just need a map to the friggin' clitoris because no one has taught them where it is. And unlike the guys that find it on their own with like no problem at all, they know where their penis is, most women do not know where their clitoris is. So a lot of times this is just education and they do just fine. But what I really want to focus on for the rest of my time is acquired orgasmic dysfunction. Acquired orgasmic dysfunction is the woman who used to have orgasms just fine. But then when she would try all of her tried and true things that worked for her, nothing was happening. Fireworks turned into nada. Or it took so long and it was so feeble that she said, I can't do this. It's way too much work, so I'm not gonna bother anymore. So that's delayed orgasm. And it's actually pretty common. It's pretty common. But people don't talk about it. It's not like you go out to lunch with your friends and you say, I'm not able to have orgasms anymore, are you? So women think that they are the only ones because in the movies and everything, everyone sees everyone having amazing orgasms within 15 seconds. But it's actually about 55% of women around the time of perimenopause and menopause, and then it only gets worse as time goes on. Very much like erectile dysfunction in the guys, same thing. So why is this? What's going on? Well, there's a lot of reasons. This is like many things in medicine, very multifactorial. We know that certainly aging has to do with it, medical conditions. It can be pelvic surgery. It can be a consequence of cancer treatments. The list is very long of things that can cause women to have difficulty with orgasm. But really what it comes down to is a clitoris that needs to wake up, that's not responding. And because of changes of aging, hormones, or a medical condition, those nerve endings are just asleep at the wheel. Nothing is happening. So what causes that? Well, essentially what we have are anything that's going to get in the way of blood flow, because I mentioned you need blood flow, and you need sensitive nerve endings, is in turn going to cause the clitoris to not function anymore. So aging, of course, there's nothing we can do about that. But if you look at the things that are the most important, it's cardiovascular disease and it's diabetes. Because diabetes, you've all heard about neuropathy and diabetes, foot neuropathy, other neuropathies, those teeny little nerves are not responding. Well, you can also have a clitoral neuropathy. And I can guarantee you that if you're sitting in the audience and you have diabetes, talk to me after if your endocrinologist ever brought that up, because we know that they are not talking about it, even though it is a huge, huge issue. And then we get to medications. And at the top of the list is the SSRI antidepressants. And this is something, of course, that we're seeing in very, very young women as well. And somewhere between 30 to 50% of women who take an SSRI have problems with not just libido, but with the ability to have an orgasm. And while it sometimes goes away on its own, in many cases it does not. And let's just start with the fact that 1 out of 4 women by the age 50 is taking an SSRI. Whole nother topic. So, are there other things that get in the way? You bet. There's a long list. And there's a lot of psychosocial things, which I'm not minimizing that, but I'm a gynecologist. I refer to sex therapists for all that, and I'm not going to be talking about that today. Today, I'm really going to stick to the hormonal, medical, and biological aspects behind the inability to have an orgasm. But I also want to emphasize that sometimes it's a downstream effect of something else. Sometimes there's nothing wrong with the clitoris, but because of pain, because of low libido, because of stress, insomnia, because of menopause symptoms, that can also impact on the ability to have an orgasm. So we have to fix all that stuff first. So let's talk solutions, because you're all here for solutions. It's one thing for me to talk about that it's not working. You know it's not working. So now we're going to talk about what you can do to fix it. Now, of course, long before you even attempt to go to your doctor to talk about this, you've headed over to the internet to see what you can find. And there is no end of things that you can rub on your clitoris that is going to help with orgasm. The problem is A, there's no data, B, it doesn't work beyond the rubbing it on your clitoris, and the longer you rub it on, the more chance it's gonna work. But beyond that, this is all completely a waste of money. So, what I'm going to start with is the FDA-approved medications to help women have an orgasm. Are you ready? Okay. We have completed our review of the FDA-approved medications to help you with orgasm. It does not exist. But having said that, experts such as myself, we do have a toolbox, a very good toolbox of things that we can offer you, of things that some things are things that you actually apply to the clitoris, some things you swallow. There are a lot of medications, like everything else in medicine, that are for some other purpose, but that we found to be helpful. Also, a lot of things you can do. I'm a big believer in sex therapy, pelvic floor physical therapy, HRT, husband replacement therapy. Sometimes that's all you need. And I don't have time to go through the whole list today, but I do have a book coming out called Come Again that's going to go through all of these things. Because what I really want to focus on for the rest of the time is how we can increase clitoral sensation by doing either increasing stimulation, increasing blood flow, or, and I didn't talk much about this, but you want to enhance the pathways to the pleasure centers in the brain. So any of the things that I had on the slide before are going to fit into one of these categories, sometimes more than one of these categories. Now, the things that is the easiest to do, of course, is to increase stimulation. And we call this vibrator therapy. I have another lecture called Why Would a Doctor Prescribe a Vibrator? And there's many, many reasons. It's not just that you're increasing clitoral stimulation, it's the kind of stimulation. You can rub real hard, but nothing's gonna happen. But there's something about vibration. So when I think in terms of a vibrator, I actually don't call this a sex toy. I call this a sex tool. Because it's not just about making orgasm more pleasurable, it's about making it possible. And that is a medical tool. So, this is the science behind why a vibrator works. And I can tell you that 99% of doctors out there do not know this. Basically, in the clitoris, you've got 10,000 nerve endings. Remember when they talked about how, we've discovered that there's 10,000 nerve endings and everyone's celebrating? I was not celebrating. The clitoris, the head of the clitoris is very, very small. You put 10,000 nerve endings in there, they're really little. These little nerve endings don't always function so well, especially as people get older. But within those nerve endings, there's different types of nerve endings. Some respond to stroking, licking, soft touch, and some respond to deep pressure and vibration. Well, it turns out that the ones that respond to licking, stroking, touch are the smallest neurons, and they're the ones that also don't have a protective sheath around them. The ones that respond to vibration are the bigger ones, and they have a nice protective sheath. So what that means is that as you age, as you get medical conditions, the ones that are going to go first are the little guys, and the ones that are going to stick around are the ones that respond to vibration. So there's actually a science behind why a vibrator works as women age and they have medical problems. So obviously, if you've never used a vibrator, it's time to go shopping, which is not necessarily easy depending on where you live. Because in Texas, did you know this? Texas limits the number of vibrators that you can own. Anyone want to guess how many vibrators you're allowed to own in Texas? I can't make this up. How many vibrators can you own in Texas? 6. Oh my God. I'm not even going to ask how you know that, but if I had a prize to give. So it used to be 0. And about, I don't know when it was, 8, 9 years ago, there was like a house party. You know how you have Tupperware parties? Well, there was a vibrator party, and a woman was buying vibrators, and there was an undercover cop there. I mean, I don't know who sent, but anyway. So she bought the vibrator, and they put her in jail, and she was like a kindergarten teacher and a mother of 4. And so they decided, okay, maybe we need to change the law. So Ted Cruz inexplicably picked 6. And said that, but however, he wasn't even in favor of that because, in fact, using a vibrator is, and I'm quoting him, is no different than hiring a prostitute. Anyway, yeah, so, but you can have as many guns as you want, just saying. Okay, so, all right, so that's about increasing vibration, so we all got that down. Now we want to increase blood flow, because if you don't have healthy neurons and good blood flow, it doesn't matter if you use your vibrator. Nothing's going to happen. So how are we going to increase clitoral sensation? Well, there's a lot of different things that we can use that's going to increase blood flow to the clitoris. Estrogen, of course, is at the top of the list, but there's a lot of other things that we can use that's going to help you have a healthy clitoris, healthy nerve endings, and more response. So what about Viagra, right? So let's just start with the fact that a penis is a larger, less sensitive clitoris. So if Viagra works for a penis, theoretically, it should work for a clitoris. Unfortunately, first of all, there have not been a lot of studies done. And the studies that have been done, the results have been very, very inconsistent. So while we do use it in some circumstances, particularly in women who can't have an orgasm after an SSRI, we don't use that universally, and it doesn't work universally. Now, I do have an entire podcast episode on Viagra because it's actually pretty interesting, and there's a lot more I'd like to share with you, but I want to get to the cannabis stuff. So if you're interested in using Viagra to help with orgasm, then check that out. So let's get to cannabis, which is really kind of interesting in terms of, is this a good thing in your toolbox to help with orgasmic function? So cannabis is pretty mainstream in the menopause world right now. And in fact, a study came out a couple years ago showing that 27% of women are using cannabis for help with their hot flashes, their mood swings, being able to think more clearly, sleep, of course, and all of that. And they are also using cannabis to help with sexual function, including orgasm. There's a long history of cannabis being used for this kind of stuff. And in fact, if you look at the turn of the century, every single major pharmaceutical company, Eli Lilly, Pfizer, they all were distributing cannabis for everything that ails you, but particularly for menopause symptoms. And in Merck's manual, which was a textbook, they actually have in the textbook that women can use cannabis for help with, they called it climacteric disorders, was the word for menopause back then. But notice what's underneath it. It says cannabis, and right underneath it is change of air and scene. So I love the notion that a woman who is struggling with menopause would be sent on a vacation and told to smoke some weed. I mean, think about that. But this goes back a long, long way. So here we are now. All of these women that were using cannabis like at Woodstock just to like have fun are now using it to be able to enhance their sex lives, to be able to just really function, to be able to get through all these menopause symptoms and get through life. So today I'm gonna kind of just focus on orgasm, even though cannabis is being used for many other things. Now, I will start by saying that we have 0 data. I know you'll be shocked to hear this, but no one is really interested in studying orgasm in postmenopause women because, of course, postmenopause women aren't interested in sex, only older men who are evidently having sex with women who are 20 years younger. Anyway, so what I'm going to talk about is the science of cannabis in terms of, does it make sense that it would help with orgasm? Well, There's cannabinoid receptors throughout our body, including in every single part of the body that has to do with sexual function and orgasm. So whether we're looking at the brain or we're looking at the pelvic floor muscles or we're looking at the genitals and specifically the clitoris, yeah, there are cannabinoid receptors there. So that speaks to it being useful. But then we want to look at, earlier I'd said you need really two things in order to have an orgasm. One is decent blood flow to the clitoris, and the other is nerve endings that are actually going to respond so that you get increased clitoral sensation. So is cannabis going to do that? Well, yeah, actually it can. So if we look at CBD specifically, CBD is a known vasodilator, meaning it makes blood vessels wider, increases blood flow, and we know that if you put CBD directly on the genitals, that it is going to increase blood flow. Are there any studies that look at it in orgasm? No, but there are a lot of products out there that recommend that you do this. But the other thing that's interesting about CBD is most of the data we have on CBD and the impact on nerves is in diabetics. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of diabetics have clitoral neuropathy in addition to their foot neuropathy and all their other neuropathies. So we do know that CBD is going to increase nerve sensitivity in other parts of the body. So it actually makes sense, right? That it might also increase nerve sensitivity in the clitoris. Do we have any data? No. But we do know that CBD does increase blood flow and theoretically increases nerve sensitivity. And then we get to, what about if you eat it, if you use an edible, if you smoke it, if you vape it, if you use a tincture? Well, you know, your mouth is a long way from the clitoris. But it turns out that using systemic cannabis seems to also potentially have an impact. Why? Because we know that if you are using systemic cannabis, that again, you are going to have not only vasodilation throughout the body, which is going to increase pelvic blood flow, but you are also going to activate the brain's reward system. Because I haven't talked a lot about neurotransmitters, but you need that release of dopamine, which is going to help the pleasure centers activate, which is going to help the orgasm experience. And we know that the cannabis can do that. We also know that cannabis, again, is going to impact on muscles and help with contraction and relaxation and increase clitoral sensation, theoretically. Theoretically, we have no data, but theoretically. So when we think in terms of what it's going to do for orgasm, because we have no data, I decided to do a little research. So I have a survey, which I've actually been working on for a year or so, and I'm still looking for more participants, but I have presented this data at a number of science conferences. And in my survey, what I looked at was not just orgasm, but really all of the symptoms that postmenopausal women have that we've been hearing about all morning. The hot flashes, the insomnia, libido issues, painful sex. Because we look at, we've got 27% of women who are using it for these symptoms, and I want to know what is their experience and is it working? So that was my survey. So in this survey, when I asked about why are you using cannabis, it turns out that about 1 in 4 women was using it specifically to help with orgasm. So the first question I asked was, what kind of cannabis was in the product that you were using? Now, for those of you who know a little something about cannabis, you always hear that sativa. Sativa is the one that is going to help with sexual function. That's going to help with libido, and we know that if you have a better libido, you're going to have the downstream effect of maybe better orgasm. So I thought before I did the survey that women who are taking cannabis to help with their orgasm are going to go for sativa products. And it turns out that the majority of people were using a hybrid. No surprise, most cannabis out there is a hybrid. You know, we don't have too many products that are pure sativa, pure indica. In fact, it kind of doesn't exist anymore. They're all hybrid. But I thought they would be more sativa dominant, and they were not. It was really kind of all over the map, but most people either were using a hybrid or they had no idea what they were using. And then I thought, well, okay, how are they consuming this cannabis? Because I'm thinking, if I'm a woman and I want to use cannabis to help with an orgasm, I'm going to go, you know, right where the gold is. I'm going to, you know, get a topical and put it right on the clitoris. And that's not what was happening. It was really pretty much even across the board. That women were using it, they were smoking it, vaping it, using a tincture, eating it, putting it directly on. Even, totally even. But then we get to the real news. did it help you orgasm? 95% of women said that it helped them orgasm. I mean, this is crazy. There's no pharmaceutical, including estrogen, certainly not Viagra, certainly not anything else that I recommend in my toolbox that I showed you earlier to help women with orgasm that we get these kind of results. And I want to be clear, this is perception. This is not a placebo-controlled scientific study where we gave half these women fake cannabis and half these women real cannabis. I'm very data-driven and evidence-based. This is not that. This is what was your experience? What was your experience? But I still think that it's useful information to know why women are using cannabis, what kind of cannabis they're using, and what their perception is of how it works. Now, the other thing that I didn't talk much about is when you use cannabis, just like alcohol, there's a disinhibition. You know, people kind of are able to just let themselves go, let themselves be freer. And what we have found in studies, not good studies, we don't have any good studies, but what we have found in studies is just like alcohol, a little alcohol is good, a lot of alcohol is really bad. And in fact, when we look at orgasm, same thing. A little alcohol helps people have an orgasm, a lot of alcohol just deadens it. You know, it's just really is not gonna help. Cannabis seems to be the same. Cannabis seems to be the same, that a little bit is good and a lot is bad. But the point is that while this doesn't tell us for sure, because it's not a scientific study, I think this is really interesting and something that we have to start to pay more attention to, particularly because, let's just face it, we don't have a pharmaceutical and doctors are not helping. So, I also wanted to know where they got their information from, okay? Because they're on their own, right? And that's exactly what my survey showed. More than half the women said, no one helped me, I figured it out on my own. Now, a lot of them then got their help from a friend or a relative, which generally means their manicurist or their hairdresser who told them that it worked for them and this is what you should do. And then, of course, you go to the guy, the 12-year-old, you know, who's working in the dispensary. Now, I did my own very unscientific study. I was in Colorado, which, of course, there's a dispensary about every 10 feet. I walked into every dispensary and I said, hi, I'm a menopausal woman. And I'm having hot flashes. Can you help me? And then I can't sleep. Or I listed all the symptoms. I mean, they looked at me like deer in headlight until I said sleep. Then they got all excited because they know how to help people sleep. They knew exactly what to tell me. And I said, okay, but if I'm a little older, is there anything I need to worry about? No. Whether you're 20 or whether you're 70, they're going to give you the same thing to help you sleep. And we're going to talk about why that's a problem. But the point is that they're not getting their information from healthcare professionals. And even though a few of them said they did, it's more likely than not, and I don't know this for a fact, it's probably an oncologist. Because the oncologists are really good at this stuff because they've been using it so long and they're comfortable with it and they have it available to them for patients who are going through chemotherapy. So the doctors are not helping. And in fact, when I talk to doctors, and I talk to doctors a lot, I tell them, I'm not telling you this because I'm expecting you to recommend this to your patients. I'm telling you this because your patients are using it. And you need to know this, and you need to talk about it with them, including the risks. So is there anyone here who's old enough to remember Reefer Madness? Yeah, Reefer Madness was actually the US government that was putting propaganda in theaters to steer people away from the evils of marijuana. Now, you notice I didn't use the word marijuana anymore because it really is derogatory. We use cannabis. Marijuana was about, it's the evil Mexicans that are bringing it across the border because marijuana was Spanish for cannabis. So, but we do know, however, that there are risks. Not going to call death and murder, but there are risks. And particularly when we look at postmenopause women. Why? Because postmenopause women metabolize cannabis much more slowly than younger women. It turns out that estrogen, which by the time you leave here, you're going to think, okay, estrogen is like, is there anything estrogen doesn't do? But one of the things that estrogen does is it is in the metabolic pathway of our endocannabinoid system. So what that means is that if you lose your estrogen, we are going to metabolize it differently, whether it's in our endocannabinoid system, which a lot of people think this is one of the reasons we have hot flashes, another topic. But this also means that if you use a phytocannabinoid, that it's just not going to get metabolized as quickly, and that women are going to potentially get into trouble. So short-term risks, we know that women who use cannabis are postmenopause women are much more liable to have problems like dizziness, dry mouth, nausea, vomiting, fatigue, drowsiness, loss of balance. We hope you don't have osteoporosis because you're gonna fall down and break your hip when you've been taking your cannabis to get your sleep. But it's really a big problem. And then we're starting to have a lot of emerging data on the long-term risks. And we know that older women, particularly if they smoke it or vape it, get into trouble. And the reason is that trip through the lungs has a huge impact on pulmonary function and cardiovascular health. And there was a new study that just came out a few weeks ago showing that women that use cannabis on a regular basis, if they smoke it or inhale it, have twice the risk of developing cardiovascular disease. So smoking and vaping is really not the way to go. A lot of women are much more comfortable with edibles. The problem with edibles is that people metabolize it very, very slowly. And so we know that long-term, people that are doing this are having problems, not just with cardiovascular stuff, but also cognitive function, brain health, other things down the road. So when I talk to women about cannabis, and I don't prescribe it per se, but I do want to help women in terms of using this stuff safely if they're going to, and as we get more information. So across the board, I say don't smoke it, don't vape it. If you're gonna eat it, if you're gonna use an edible, what you wanna do is you wanna start very, very slow and and then bring it up very, very slowly, because what happens is women will have like the piece of candy, right? And then an hour later, it's not working, and it was delicious. So they have another piece of candy, and that's how they overdose. And we are actually seeing huge numbers of women in emergency rooms who are inadvertently overdosing from their cannabis use. So if you want to use an edible, it's not that you shouldn't use edibles, you need to be very careful about the dosage, and you really need to time it. And then people with THC, most of the cannabis that you're going to get, recreational stuff, is going to be microdoses of THC. It's not hallucinogenic. It's not going to do anything in terms of that. Higher doses, of course, you can get into trouble, and it can cause paranoia, anxiety, et cetera. So I'm going to end there and open it up for any questions. I do have my next book coming out is about orgasm, postmenopause orgasm, and I'm hoping that that will have a lot more information that will help everybody. But we have a couple minutes left if anybody would like to ask a question. Yes.
So I'm curious, getting right down to it. So if you did want to, play around with taking cannabis in order for specifically orgasm, where would you start? Like, do you just take it? Like what is the recommended?
Yeah, again, there's we don't have data, but based on what we know, I mean, I think certainly CBD is very important because it increases blood flow. And I think a little THC is also important because that's really going to help with those pathways to the brain and triggering dopamine release, the neurotransmitter part of it. But if you were to say to me, okay, but am I better off using it systemically? As in a tincture? I didn't talk much about tinctures that you either put under the tongue or inside the mouth, which are actually very safe to use and is one of my favorite approaches because it's harder to get into trouble with it. The onset of action is very quick so that you don't overdose, and they work very nicely. There's not as many of them available. But I tell postmenopause women, if you're gonna do this, my preference is that you use a tincture and maybe even a little bit of topical CBD. The absence of data is not the same as knowing it doesn't work. Right now, we're operating in the absence of data.
Hey, thank you so much for everything. I've gotten lots of texts asking if you're going to make these slides available or if people could share, because everyone's taking pictures of them, to share them.
I don't make the slides available, but all this information is in my book and in my podcast.
Okay, yeah. Great, totally fair. Then good thing we took photos of them. But everybody tag Lauren and the book. Should we tag the book when we post these?
I'm sorry, what?
Okay, so who to tag? Because a lot of people took photos of these. Do you want us to not use them?
Oh no, they can. I don't care of that, but I don't like share the whole.
Got it.
Yes.
When we tag, is there a way to tag your book as well as you?
Not yet.
Okay.
Because
then
the
just
new book is so my series on menopause is called Dr. Streicher's Inside Information, which is also the name of my podcast. And my books, instead of doing one big book on menopause, my approach is not everyone wants to read about the same thing. Some people it's hot flashes, some people it's vaginal dryness, some people it's bladder stuff, some people it's sexual stuff and orgasm. So I basically am doing a series of books, and the new one coming out is specifically about postmenopause, libido, and orgasm, which should be out end of June. Awesome. That's the Come Again book. Yes.
Hi there. Thanks again for this illuminating conversation. I recently finished Emily Nagoski's Come As You Are book, and I'm curious if you perceive there to be a spectrum of orgasm.
So this is the thing. Come As You Are is a wonderful, wonderful book written by Dr. Nagoski, and she's brilliant and wonderful and wrote a wonderful book. She is a therapist. So she is really focusing on the psychosocial aspects, whereas I am focusing on the biologic aspects. You need both. I mean, I haven't talked about the psychosocial today, but you need both. And in fact, my daughter, who is a sex therapist and a clinical sexologist, and I don't know if you noticed there's a second name on that book, Rachel Zara, she's my daughter, and she will be handling that aspect. But I love Dr. Nagoski's work, and this is absolutely a collaborative effort.
And then lastly, where do we find sex therapists?
There's an organization called ASEC, the American Society of Sexual Counselors and Therapists, and I think it's asec.org, and you can find a sex therapist there. And when you talk about a sex therapist is not the same as a sex coach. I want to be very clear about that. A sex therapist is someone who has a minimum of a master's degree, very often a PhD. They have done very, very extensive training. And the beauty of a sex therapist is they know the science. I lecture to them all the time. You know, there's a number of universities that train sex therapists. And so if you go to them and say, I have SSRI-induced inability to have an orgasm, they'll say, gotcha. I know that. If you say I'm using dilator therapy for vaginal pain, they'll say, let me walk you through it. You know what I mean? They really, really know. And they're worth their weight. And if you live in Chicago, LA, or New York, you're usually in pretty good luck. But telemedicine, you know, there's always that. Yes?
Thanks. You recommended sativa as like which way you should go, or like a hybrid. If we had indica, is there obviously like not as much benefit, but like a disbenefit essentially, or you know, kind of what is the difference there?
You know, it's a perfectly legitimate question. We have no data. I mean, we are really functioning in a vacuum here. And I hate to say it's a do-it-yourself project, and I rarely say that because everything else I do, I'm so science-based. I can't answer that question. We do not have the data. Yes.
Because, you know, I assume not all cannabis is created equal.
Correct.
And not all states have access.
Correct.
So if you're doing it yourself, researching it yourself, can women just go onto the internet? Or is Delta 9 or whatever might be in their state fine? Or should they be more specific?
Well, so this is the thing. When we talk about where do you get cannabis that you know is going to be quality controlled and consistent, number one is sometimes on the internet you can do okay with that, you know, who knows. But the most important thing is I would go to a bigger brand, and then once you find something that works for you, don't mess with it. Because what happens is it might say it has 5 milligrams of CBD, and you know, it lists it all, and then you say, okay, well, I found another brand that lists the exact same thing. It's not the same. No cannabis plant is the same. And that's one of the many reasons that makes research so challenging. So find a brand that you like, go with a big brand, and then stick with it. There's a podcast called Do the Pot. I don't know if you've heard of it. I was a guest on it. We did 4 parts on menopause, which was great. And honestly, it's a terrific source for women because she really does a deeper dive than I do into the specific brands and what you can get. But once you find something you like, stick with it. Yes?
Do birth controls that impact estrogen production have similar effects on the metabolization of cannabis and like blood flow to the clitoris and those things that you mentioned in relation to menopause?
Yeah, so the question was out in women who have birth control pill issues with libido and orgasm. Is that what you're talking about? No, that's a different reason. And in fact, I don't know if you were here for Alicia Gupta a couple of sessions ago. She's a New York Times writer, and we just did a wonderful article that she interviewed me on that looked at the impact of birth control pills on sexual function, and why is it that a birth control pill can cause you to have problems with libido and problems with orgasm. And the reason is that there's testosterone receptors in the vagina, And we've heard so much about estrogen receptors. You've got testosterone receptors there too. And it turns out that in some women, it's actually genetic, that in some women, you can get a downregulation of those testosterone receptors in the vagina so that you get less sensitivity and you don't orgasm. And by the same token, you also have a decrease in available testosterone. So it appears to be that the birth control pill story is a different story. Same end result, but different story. Anything else? Yes?
Does that kind of qualify the same thing for like SSRIs, like Lexapro, all those types of?
Yeah, I'm sorry, what was the question about the antidepressants?
In terms of like orgasm and
Oh.
stuff like that, does it inhibit orgasm? Is it harder to reach climax?
Yeah, so we think the reason is that if you look at what these antidepressants do, all the SSRIs, and there's a very long list, I think there's 9 of them right now, is basically that is gonna alter dopamine and serotonin in the brain. And we know that dopamine, we want those levels high for libido and orgasm, and we want serotonin to be low. And the SSRIs, of course, mess with that. So when we talk about the fact that I talk so much about blood flow and nerve sensitivity, that's not what the SSRIs are doing. They're messing with the brain. They're messing with the neurotransmitter levels, which in turn causes a decrease in response. And so, you know, I just did a whole lecture on that with someone a little bit ago, and the data's all over the map on that one. You know, some psychiatrists say, oh, it's all in your head because depression causes problems with sex, so it's not the SSRI, it's the depression. Other people say the numbers are more like 50% to 80%. Clearly there's an impact, but we don't know exactly why some people get it and other people do not. And there's a whole strategy to making that better besides trying Viagra. Anything else? I think we're out of time here. Thank you so much.